Hi, everybody. Welcome to CANNAfact Friday. I'm so relieved that Friday is here. How are you today, David?
I'm doing well, Adriana. How are you?
I am fantastic. I'm super excited for the show today. This is a topic that we haven't tackled yet, and I think it's going to be a really good one. We have an awesome guest today. So, for anyone who's tuning in and doesn't know what CANNAfact Friday is, it is a weekly show right here on LinkedIn Live where we talk about stats, facts, fun data pieces from the week, and then we add some context to explain what it all might mean. My name is Adriana. I'm the VP of Demand at ISA, which is a firm specializing in custom research for cannabis brands. And I'm joined by my co-host, David Palaschuk, who is the author of the best-selling book, Branding Bud. Welcome.
Hi, Adriana. It's great to be here. I can't believe it's Friday already. This week has just flown by. But I'm excited too. We've got a great guest today, Brian Anderson from Anderson Porter, and we will be chatting about retail dispensary design. And that, like you said, it's something we have not chatted about yet, and yet that plays such a critical part in terms of what the experience is for someone shopping for cannabis. So that said, what we do every Friday, like you said, is we take data points that interest us. We then leverage them into our conversation. We try to contextualize those with industry experts, and we talk about them and we talk through them, and we seek to better understand what's taking place in our industry, because things are moving so fast all the time, and we get bits and bytes every week, and it's really hard to make anything of it. I think one of the perfect examples is the beverage category. We hear all the time it's the fastest growing category, yet it only makes up 1 to 3% of the cannabis market. So again, one soundbite is great and really spins you off. Two sound bites sort of balance, the
Well,
conversation. So that's what we try to do here, is balance out the conversation and better understand all the things that are coming at us week over week. That said, what we do love to do is have fun, learn, and actually participate with the audience. So there is a chat bar to the right, and we ask everybody to participate. Feel free to ask questions as we go along, either of us or of Brian, who is our industry expert today. And so with that, I would like to introduce our guest for today. I'm going to read his. Here he is. I'm gonna read your introduction, Brian, just so I don't mess it up. Brian is the founding partner of Anderson Porter Design, with over 25 years of experience focused on cannabis industry products. To date, Brian has designed over 30 retail dispensaries and over 2.5 million square feet of cultivation and manufacturing space, which is pretty amazing. Brian combines expertise in strategic thinking, designing for industrial agriculture, and coordinating specialist teams for the cannabis industry. Brian also brings design experience with a specialization in energy efficient design and sustainability, and he was trained at RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, and Harvard University. So welcome. It's great to have
Brian.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah. It's always great when we can say we have a Harvard trained architect as our guest. And not only that, you've designed at least 30 retail dispensaries, which is really cool. So we can talk about design philosophy as much
Absolutely.
as we could talk about the reality of designing a cannabis dispensary.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love your format here, mixing, data from around the country with anecdotal evidence to support it. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for
We're
joining us.
definitely looking forward to it.
Right on. Well, as we do, we also have a CANNAfact and CANNAfiction component to it, which adds some fun. So, Adriana, do you want to jump into that?
Absolutely. Let's do it. Let's throw up our very first. We're going to play a little game here with the audience. I think we might be having a little bit of difficulty actually being on the LinkedIn page, but you know what? We're going to have fun anyway. We're going to take a little guess, and let's throw up the first one, which is CANNAfact or CANNAfiction, and this will be fun. We'll have David and we'll have Brian weigh in on this one. So the point of the game is guess if this is CANNAfact or CANNAfiction. 68% of cannabis consumers say they have a favorite dispensary. So this was from a poll that we did in October 2021, last fall. We asked 400 cannabis consumers across the US whether they have a favorite dispensary. And we're going to tell you the results in just a second. I think that this is a fun one, right? Because you might ask the question, how many dispensaries do you visit? Which we will share that stat in a little bit. But I think this one is even more telling because you may be experimenting with where you want to shop. You may be open to looking at different locations, but you might not have yet picked your favorite. So what do you all think about that? First of all, do you have a favorite dispensary?
So sure, I'll take that first. I have a local dispensary, which is the one that I go to. So it's not my favorite, but it's my local. So I would have, yeah. So I think I don't know. I would have. I don't know if other people. I was kind of imagining that everybody would have a favorite dispensary. So I have a favorite, but it's not one that I, it's not one that I get to visit often enough. So
And that's interesting. I think you bring up a good point, which we'll touch upon a little bit later, which is, your favorite or your local.
yeah,
Um, and I was going to say the same thing, or I was headed in that direction of that. I don't think there's I'm jaded here in Seattle. And for those folks in California like you, Adriana, it's a little bit different than for folks like Brian, who's in Massachusetts, where, there might not be as many dispensaries as there are Starbucks, right? So,
that's right.
um, so yeah, I think a lot of people are almost forced, if you will, to go to, to go to go to a dispensary and find that. So it's interesting. I would say that 68% of cannabis consumers have a local dispensary that they go to, and I think the way this was asked, they would say it's their favorite. That's my guess, just because of the lack of number of dispensaries.
Yeah.
I'll go with that.
I have a favorite for sure, but every now and then I'll be on the road or I'll be in a different neighborhood and I'll just pop into a random one. But I do have one that's like typically the one that I go after. So let's reveal the answer. CANNAfact or CANNAfiction? Let's see. And this one was in fact CANNAfact. It is true. 68% told us that they have a favorite dispensary. This is well, actually, I should qualify this even more, is that we talk to dispensary shoppers specifically. So if you're not a dispensary shopper, you are not part of this poll. What do you think? Surprising?
I think, again, I'll say, because of the limited offering in terms of dispensaries, it's not surprising to me that people, kind of find the one they feel most comfortable with, and it becomes their favorite. But probably unlike us, most people are really local. The three of us get around in the cannabis space. Every time I travel, I go to a dispensary. Brian, you design dispensaries, so I'm sure you make it your business to
Yeah.
see what's happening. I'm curious, Brian, what is your favorite dispensary?
So I mean, it's a mix. There's there's I do a lot of travel, so I have not yet been to Seattle to visit dispensaries. I haven't been to Portland, Oregon to visit dispensaries or around Oregon. Um, but there's a group called there's a group in Canada called Prairie Records that sell cannabis sort of the way we used to buy vinyl records. And just from a concept, it's like it right. How do you connect I think what is successful there is a connecting two things, right? Maybe it's a demographic. I fit sort of an age group that used to buy vinyl records, so therefore I can connect with that. If you've never bought vinyl records in your life, poof, doesn't matter to you, right? So I respect that there's different ways that we all buy and have connections to how we consume. But that one to me just is really interesting that it connects sort of a lifestyle and an idea. Probably the first time I ever got high was in my friend Tommy's basement smoking a bong and listening to the Who. And so there's a connection there between vinyl records and memories. And so right, music
I can
has that,
totally see that.
right?
Right. Absolutely. It's funny you say that. I in my book, I talk about the 14 cannabis brand archetypes. One of them is nostalgia, and that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Nostalgia really comes on as we age, right? So, for the 21-year-old consumer, they're not really so nostalgic. I
Right.
don't necessarily know who is at that age, but as we get older, it's interesting how that happens. So, Brian, coming back to the dispensaries, there's so many looks and feels, if you will, experiences. Is there is there a perfect look and feel to a dispensary? Are there many look and feels to dispensaries? Would you talk about that as almost segmentation, if you will?
So I'll say that design matters, right? As an architect, I have to say that. I believe design matters. Um, but the industry is not mature yet. This is a nascent industry that is coming out of, the sort of legacy culture where head shops and beaded curtains and sort of, used glass cases, right? And slat wall. Um, that's part of it, and I understand where that's coming from. I also understand that it's a high volume, low margin industry, right? So there's not always just tons and tons of capital pouring in and saying, hey, let's design the best space. So I understand the kind of the weight of how to move into this space, but design does matter, right? So if you're trying to establish a brand through retail and express that brand through a retail store, then the way in which you fashion the space, the way in which you talk to your customer through materials, through educate to provide education, will give you. You always want your customer to have a reason to come back to your store, right? How do you define why in their mind this is their favorite place to come? And to establish a connection, and a reason for someone to come back, then the design is important, lighting is important, materials are important, how they shop is important. So I think all those elements are matter.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we did is we asked a group to tell us about the same group to tell us about your favorite dispensary, and then what qualities do they have that makes them your favorite. And some of the things we started to see, and these are just open-ended questions, but they're designed like a Starbucks and only have top quality things. It's really cool because they have all their strains in glass domes with good lighting, so you can really check out what you're getting. And then it's clean and modern and makes shopping for cannabis fun and easy. Again, um, I think people are looking for what they look for outside of cannabis too, what they live in their daily lives, right?
I mean, there are, um, on the other side of that, there are museum quality cannabis stores that will um, treat with pedestals, right? They'll sort of elevate the product to that, like a museum would display and exhibit a product, whether that's glassware, whether that's a prized flower, sort of elevating the senses of the customer to heighten that experience, to really promote maybe the quality behind how that product is grown. Maybe it's organic nature, or maybe part of the phenotypes, right, of the flower, the expression of the flower. I know from with working with customers that lighting the flower can increase sales, right? And this is true in all across many segments of
That is really
retail.
interesting.
But if you light the bud with a direct LED or other type of luminaire, you can increase sales just because it makes it more accessible to the customer to see it and to see I mean, the flower is a beautiful flower, right? And so if you can express that through lighting and through getting someone closer to it as opposed to only seeing it from 5 feet away, those are all positive ways to engage the customer.
I would imagine that that lighting point you just made would also contribute to a feeling of it being high end, like a jewelry store. So in your mind, you're thinking, oh, this is a luxury experience. I'm going to spend some luxury type of dough in here.
Right. And depending on your market, depending on your state, here, Massachusetts is a pretty robust market. So 3.5 grams is going to run you 48 to $50, right? That's
Yeah.
$8,000 a pound on the retail market. That's a very, very high end product to sell at that price point. So yeah, it better be displayed well. You got to convince the customer that's worth paying.
We do have a question that just came in from Jennifer Holland, who's my colleague. Hi, Jen. What about music? I've read that music can impact purchase behavior. Interesting. Any thoughts on that one, Brian or David?
Well, Jennifer, I'll tell you that when I first came into this industry in 2014, so long ago for some, not that long ago for others, I had growers telling me that they played music for their plants and that we were designing sound systems into our cultivation facilities. So yeah, there's a deep connection to music here in many, many aspects of the industry. But music, so in retail, I think good retail engages all five of the customer's senses. I think aroma is important. I think sound is important. Touch, visual, and aroma, aroma. So all of the five senses. So yeah, if you can play music in a dispensary, I think it increases the positive experience. But you don't want to play the wrong music, right? You don't want to. So this is difficult. This is why Muzak exists, right? That's why elevator music exists, right? It's trying not to offend anybody, but it offends everybody at the same time.
Exactly. Well said.
Equally.
I have a question for you, Brian, and this is about designing for specific people. So when you're looking at, okay, I'm opening up a shop, it's going to be in Massachusetts, for example. How do you like look at who is that audience? Like look at the local people. Does that help you inform what design choices you'll be making?
So yeah, design choices have two sides to them, right? I think that one of the biggest areas for cannabis entrepreneurs to explore is consumer polling, is really understanding who their audience is, who are they selling to, and building a brand through and reinforcing that brand through product selection, through retail environment that helps support that target customer. And it's, obviously you want to have a wide range, right? You want to sell to as many people as possible. But to be clear and concise, that's an area that has a long way to go in retail. Is so from the so the one side of that is understanding who is your audience, who are you designing to, which demographic, and the other, I think part of what you asked in terms of how to design is what does the state require from a regulatory perspective. And I've seen, and we all see this radical different ways of selling product based on excuse me, based on local laws, right? So California is a very different shopping experience from Pennsylvania. I've been in wonderfully designed stores in San Francisco, where as a customer, I could walk around the counter and sit down at the security desk, no obstructions, right? No big deal in San Francisco to do that. In Massachusetts, no way. There's heavy glass in front. There's barricades. It's so sort of defensive position on design. So I think there's two sides to your question, Adriana. There's what does the retailer want in terms of connecting with the audience, and what does the retailer shoehorned into to meet the state requirements?
Right. Yeah, it can be very restrictive depending on what's legally allowed.
Right.
Brian, we talk about actually, before I ask you this question, just to go back to a question that Jennifer asked about how do you choose the music? To Brian's point, customer segmentation, figuring out who is coming into your dispensary. And that may take trial and error. That may take some demographic research in terms of who's around the community. That may take some research in terms of traffic flows when things are moving through. Is it close to a stadium? Are there different types of people? Are fans coming through at certain types of the week? How do you address them? And so,
That's interesting. Yeah. What if you're
and
located next to the hockey rink, at the hockey stadium, and the game just let out, and you want to, or before the game, and you want to kind of build on that vibe? That
that's
goes to sort of how can you modulate? I like that idea. Is how can you modulate your experience to meet the environment?
That's right. So, to that point, I had worked with a dispensary here in Seattle. One of they've got a number of stores. Their flagship store is right by the stadiums. We started to throw the tailgate parties before, which gave discounts and had very specific colors in here in Seattle. The blue and green for the Seattle Seahawks. But our scheduling was all around the games because we were down in Soto by the stadiums. And, that also led us to figure out who these people were, what type of music, coming back to Jennifer's question, what type of music they listen to, so on and so forth. So it's trial by error, trial and error. It's often where you're located, and it's just some smart thinking about who might be in the area at certain times. But it's those types of things that all need to be thought about. Brian, the question I was going to ask you a moment ago is, um, certainly here in Washington State recently, there's been a high level of crime taking place in dispensaries and or adult use stores, and that's because of the federal laws, right? So these are cash businesses.
Right.
Uh, so now all of a sudden they're targets, right? And
Yep.
and so there's been a lot of things that are going on, which are just really sad here. I know that the legislature has actually put into place a bill which would uh, include more time if you specifically got caught robbing a cannabis dispensary
Wow.
versus a convenience store.
Wow.
And that's to protect, because again, federal law prohibits the use of credit cards or debit cards. So in the end, there's lots of cash in these stores. How do you take that into consideration in terms of your design process, or
Sure.
rather, do you? Is that an issue you see across the country? Is it just something that I'm seeing here on the news lately and spiking in Washington State? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, interesting. We got into my company, and I got into cannabis. One of the qualifications, if you will, part of our resume was we had worked with the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, a federal customer, in Boston, during the events around 9/11, right? So 2001, 9/11, 2001. So and as a result of our work with a federal customer, right, specifically the Federal Reserve Bank, we came to cannabis with a deep understanding of both physical security. So that's things like how do you stop a 60-foot truck moving 30 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour? So it's physical security, right? How do you impact security? And electronic security, things like key fobs and retinal scanning and fingerprint typing. That's all the electronic side of security. So these are two halves of the security question. um, and we talked earlier, right? So, the experience in shopping in San Francisco is, yes, you get your ID checked. Yes, right. You become a customer of that retailer. They want to know your email address. It's friendly. It's super friendly. But it's super relaxed, right? You're not in Massachusetts. We have what's called a Sally port, right? And the Sally port comes directly out of the prison system. It comes directly out of high security, high risk situations. So a Sally port, it's also called a man trap. Um, is where one door allows you into a vestibule. That door has to close before the next door opens. So that's a Sally port, right? So you can see
Wow, I've
how
never
nobody
heard of that before.
nobody can rush into a facility in Massachusetts because of these requirements, right? Um, so different states will put into place different requirements, and so we've just come off a round in Ohio, right? There were 70, and if you saw in November of last year, 73 licenses became available in Ohio. 1,400 people applied for those licenses, and they're starting to get released now. The state of Ohio is controlled by the Board of Pharmacy. So the controlling agency in Ohio is the Board of Pharmacy. So you can begin to understand their mindset. They're coming at this from a regulated drug. They're looking at this as an illegal drug federally, and they're applying those um, regulations. When it comes to vault design, the state of Ohio has adopted the federal regulation for vault design for narcotics, and that's 8 inches of concrete with half-inch rebar. If you know what that is, you put it in concrete to give it reinforcing bar every 6 inches horizontally and every 6 inches vertically. Awesome, right? You can't penetrate that with a truck. But that also becomes a big problem if you think about your local retailer. How many local retailers do you go into who have um, they're in a wooden framed house, right? How do you build that kind of a vault in a wood framed house? It's going to fall through the floor. So it's complicated. So the aspects of security become complicated. And one of the things we try to stay away from at all costs is bullet resistant design. So BR level in glass is bullet resistant, and it's a slippery slope, right? Most people are trained, to, if somebody with a gun comes in, the first thing you want to protect is human life. So it gets really difficult when you apply those types of measures in cannabis retail, but we're prepared to deal with all of them, and we sort of use the pieces that the state is giving us as guidelines first and foremost.
Hmm, interesting. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really varies, and I don't think the federal laws are really helping or helping at all, but certainly from a safety perspective.
My
Um,
assumption was that it was stigma, right? My assumption is that it's been around since, what is it, 1996 in California. When have y'all, Adriana,
Yeah,
had
medical in 96, and
96,
then
right?
yep.
So my assumption on the sort of ease of purchase or the lack of security in California is that it has not risen to that level. And my assumption on new states entering the market is that it's stigma, right? There's concern, there's worry, I'd be curious to hear more about what Washington is experiencing, and where you're at with store design.
Yeah.
Are they employing Sally ports? Are there glass partitions or plexi partitions between, an ID checker and a customer?
I'm
no.
glad you mentioned the stigmas, Brian, because this is something that's definitely always an underlying theme of
Right?
everything that we do. David and I, when we work together, me on the custom insight side and him on the branding and consulting side, is that's always one thing that needs to be addressed. How can we make this more mainstream? How can we make
Yes.
people feel like this is a normal, healthy thing to be doing? These are normal products, not necessarily
Right.
something that you would buy behind bars or
Right.
through like feeling like
So,
you're in a prison. So
so that goes to how we design stores too, right, David? Because if a state says that there is no live product on the floor, right? That's usually from a security perspective, and that right. So you can't, so then how do you describe the aromas? How do you describe the benefits of the plant? How do you
mhm,
literally allow the customer to really gain that experience? Becomes different in a state where they will not allow any live product on the floor, or a limited number under certain security. It's like, you have to go to the cashier to get certain things from a locked case. It's always a pain in the neck to buy those products. Right?
Yeah.
So it's I think it's always a battle between state regulation and a good retail design, and good, some tension there.
And there's across the board, across the U.S., there's really different rules and regulations. Everything from the man trap all the way through to to, well, here in Washington State, where you could just walk into the store, there certainly is no live product on the floor, or it is, but it's in glass cases.
Right.
But there is an ID checker, and now even more recently, there's also a security guard with a gun that's just standing by,
Yep.
just to let people know what that they are protected.
Right.
But I think one of the things too that is really important is personal connection, right? We look toward the bud tenders to really educate us as we go in, and and we have some quotes up from some research, where some say, "I wish I could be best friends with them. They really understand me as a person. It has a clear purpose and aspirational." Um, I think here what this speaks to in some ways is a lot of people coming out of the closet about their cannabis use, a lot of
Right.
people being able to share. This is like finally the only place that I could walk into and talk to somebody about my cannabis consumption without
Exactly.
without being judged, without being
Right.
um, looked at in a strange way. So, this is a place for personal connections to be built, but simultaneously, um, if you look at Headsets data, uh, not too long ago, they did a report on bud tenders,
Mhm.
and everybody looks at the bud tenders as the front line, so to speak.
Right.
Uh, they're the ones we need to educate so they can transfer that education to the consumer. But the bud tender churn rate is really, I'll say, off the charts. Now, according to Headset, it was 50% of bud tenders leave in the first month, and then another 50% in the next month.
Wow.
So while while I haven't done my research here, to be honest with you, I'm curious to know what the churn rate is at a McDonald's, let's say, just to
Right.
sort of get a sense of how they how they compare. But my sense based on that research was that many bud tenders are home for the summer,
Yep.
and basically looking for a summer job, or they're looking for a discount on their cannabis.
Right.
Um, so it's only lived so long, and that there really isn't a career path, if you will, like a sommelier these days, and hopefully it will get to that. But so, with all of those things said, how does a consumer feel like they're create or entering into a relationship if the bud tenders are churning so much? Do you think about that in terms of your design to
I do. Yes. Um, you
create that
know,
sense of comfort, right?
I was part of our background, part of my background coming into cannabis was having done a lot of work in uh, in an area called workplace work practice. So workplace work practice is it's not interior design per se, it's not architecture per se. It's working with enterprise to help them to understand how they do work and what enables their employees to do work. So talk about the why design matters, right? For me as an architect, how we design a facility is more than color and light and how we light the bud. It's also how an employer treats their employees. So this is a business like any other business. And I think every business suffers from high turnover rate. So just imagine designing a retail store where you're not where you're in so many retailers, because it's cannabis, because there's stigma, their town says, oh, we think the best place to have this retail store would be in an industrial area, right? Oh, great. So now there's no other retail around. Now you're imagine designing that store with no break room for your staff. Holy cow. Where are they going to go for lunch? Right? Let's say you're in a cold climate. Where do they have lockers where they can put their coats? They can put their stuff. Is there a place for them to plug in their cell phone? These are details that many employers don't think about coming into the cannabis space. So design and absolutely this influences how we design. So thinking about the design of a cannabis store not only as a customer focused enterprise, but as an employee focused enterprise. How do you maintain staff? Are there opportunities for development? Can you become a manager at this facility? What is all of these things matter when it comes to running a business. And so I think that's part of the design work that we do.
I think that's so important, especially with all the turnover that we're experiencing now, not just in cannabis, but across the board,
Everywhere, right?
everywhere.
The great
Mhm,
resignation. Just Google that and it's unbelievable. So
mhm.
we as an industry, we as a cannabis industry have to be, really cognizant of that. That's true in the product in the cultivation side. It's true in manufacturing, and it's absolutely true in retail. Um, that's an interesting stat, though. That what was it? 50% of the there's a 50% turnover rate. Um,
Yes.
so I know, thinking about that too, that there are many ways. So I think that entrepreneurs need to address that head on. Entrepreneurs need to think about their employees as valuable parts of their enterprise. But there's also ways to communicate to customers and produce and communicate information, right? So technology can play a role. E-commerce platform, right? How you can drive sales through a website, and the customer is really just coming to pick up, right? I think that's an important. Again, I don't want to use technology at the expense of employees, right? But I think it's a smart move to have both things at play, right? So developing an e-commerce platform where you're communicating, providing information online, because we all use our cell phones and we all Google something before we buy it. I think that's, and then technology in the store, right? Touch screens in the store, ways in which to communicate in the store that don't take employee time to communicate is also another tool that can be used.
Absolutely. Super interesting. I want to jump into another little game, if you don't mind. If you're okay with that, we'll throw that
Oh,
up here.
let's do it.
This should be a fun one too. Okay. Here we go. CANNAfact or CANNAfiction. 25% of cannabis consumers say they visited 4+ dispensaries in the last year. These are dispensary shoppers. How many have they visited? Do you think 25% have visited 4 or more? So it could be anything higher than 4, 4 upwards. Heavy shoppers, shopaholics for
I gotta
cannabis.
say yes. Again, I'm coming from a state, Massachusetts, that does not have as many options. There's not a store on every corner, so it's more difficult. But I'm also in the biz, so I try to visit So I would say that's not a fact. I'd say that's fiction. I'd say it's more like 50% have visited 4 plus. I
Interesting.
would say it's a higher number. It's my guess.
We
Wow.
have a comment here from Gary.
Too.
Oh,
Oh,
I think this was a comment to an earlier point about being the main contact for so many people, having a good working environment for bud tenders.
Awesome.
I'm going to disagree. I think it's a lower number. I know, again, the three of us are jaded, and actually, probably most of the people that are listening in right now are jaded. This is what we do. I'm guessing the average cannabis consumer just has a spot that they go to and they get their cannabis from. So I think it's
Curious if anyone in the audience has a guess they would like to share. Do you think this stat is CANNAfact or CANNAfiction? Do you think 25% have visited 4 or more dispensaries in the last year?
What do you think, Adriana?
Well, I know the answers, so I can't weigh in. I'll sway it.
Okay, well,
Yeah, let's reveal the answer.
drum
Ready?
roll, please.
Drum roll. It is CANNAfiction. There is a smaller percentage who say they visited 4 or more. And I think to your point, David, that's true. Like, not everybody lives in a place where there are a lot of options. I live in LA, there's dispensaries everywhere, but people I talk to who even live in the suburbs, where they're not so welcoming of dispensaries, right? Which is something that I think that you cover in your podcast too, Brian. And we should plug that later for people who are interested. But yeah, there's maybe not so many options, and maybe they're not traveling to places where there are, so they're visiting, just 1 or 2 in a year. Yeah. Interesting.
It is
Yep.
interesting. Brian, I'd like to introduce our next topic, which is really, convenience and organization and of a store and how important that is. We asked the same folks, what qualities are most important to you when it comes to shopping in a dispensary? And I was really taken aback. I mean, it's almost so obvious, but in a weird way, I'm taken aback. And I'll share why. So some of the conversations here, the comments here were pleasant experience, good prices, quick stop. I also enjoy browsing and shopping. Now, and I'll even stop there for a moment. Quick stop, browsing and shopping are two very different things. And I have spent 11 years working at American Express and MasterCard. And when it comes to purchases, there are really two different types of purchases. One is a transaction. Think of your coffee or your gas. You know what you want and you want to be on your way.
Yep.
And then there's a shopping experience. that's about seeking knowledge. That's about looking at new things. It's about the experience. It's about trying things on. You know, you name it. It's just tasting things. It's just a very different thing.
Yep.
So, excuse me. So when you design a dispensary, you find, and again, I'll use two really stereotypical examples. It's lunchtime. You have a guy that's 22 years old. He wants to buy a pre-roll. He knows he wants Blue Dream. He wants to be on his way, and he's got 30 minutes to smoke that joint, eat his lunch, and get back to work. Unfortunately, he's stuck behind the soccer mom that's looking up at the wall, looking at all the form factors that are flour, waxes, butters, tinctures,
Right.
Edibles, beverages, sublingual slips, transdermal patches, right? Once she starts asking questions, what is all of this?
Yeah.
How does it affect me? How does the means of uptake, inhalation versus ingestion, work on the dosing?
Right.
That conversation is an all-day conversation, right? So how do you take those different types of customers that are coming into a dispensary and sort of work that ability? I know you spoke about online shopping, the ability, those types of things, but how does that play into your development of a dispensary?
So yeah, we bring that to a lot of we bring that knowledge to first to market folks who don't have a multi-state platform and have the data points from other states that they're beginning to apply. But learning and working with multi-state operators who've experienced this, I think what's important to keep in mind is don't design a store with just one way to buy, just one method to purchase. you right it's don't just look at a store as being purely transactional, right, with the TSA rope lines, and the only places for information is at the POS, because that will discourage the browser and browsing and shopping experience, right? It's purely transactional. Don't do that as only one method. Try to right develop a place where you can come in and pick your order up, right? The sort of buy online, pick up in store model. If you compare that with, right, the browsing and shopping model, maybe you have a niche or an area, display area where a staff could stand and talk to a customer. Now you have two different things going on in the store at the same time. They don't overlap, they don't conflict. Each customer can shop in a particular way. So I would say diversify the shopping experience to try to hit. It's not, it's impossible to try to hit everything, but try not to be just one thing would be a good mantra.
Right. Well, all of the above.
Or yeah, test it out, right? Continuous improvement. Look at what works and what doesn't work. As an operator, is in any business, right? Take measurements over time. Talk to your staff. What is working about each piece? Be willing to adapt and be willing to change.
Right. Well, Brian, we've talked about so many things, everything from convenience and organization to normalization to really what the space is all about when you come into it, and how a consumer connects, and we appreciate that. We know that you have a podcast and also a portfolio of work. Would you like
Real small.
to share that with our listeners?
We do a podcast. You can find it lots of places, certainly on our website. It's called Cannabis is a Good Neighbor. And it came out of that experience of being an advocate for our customers in the public forum, in the public space, speaking at planning board meetings and talking to the chief of police and talking to the fire marshal. And so we bring a number of subjects forward that are not connoisseurship questions. These are really how does cannabis impact the neighborhood, and what are the positive attributes of that? So if we talk about odor control and noise control, we talk about employment. We talk about upcoming episode is going to be about banking. So variety of topics of sort of reducing stigma, I guess, might be right, and showing cannabis in a positive light and what its benefits are.
Right.
Such an important topic. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Brian, thank you so much for spending time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you both.
We
This is
appreciate your expertise, sharing it with us, and actually leveraging it in the industry, because what you do is really important. And I think that's the only way we're going to get to normalization and people feeling right about even just walking into a cannabis dispensary.
yeah, awesome. Well, thank you both very much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Brian.
So,
Go ahead, David. I know you're going to tell them about next week.
yeah, well, the first thing I want to do is I want to say if anybody is interested in getting a CANNAfact every Friday in their mailbox directly, they can do so by signing up here. The one thing we do want to talk about is next week is there is no show because we will both be traveling. So life happens, and forgive us, folks, but this will be the first week we are missing of CANNAfact Friday, but we will be back with the following week, and we'll be with Meryl Gilbert, and she is the co-founder and CEO of Trace Trust, and that is Friday, April 15th when we come back at 10 a.m. PST and 1 p.m. EST. So we're looking forward to bringing you the best folks every Friday, and we appreciate their insight and their knowledge, and I hope you'll join us every Friday.
There is also a link in the chat to that event page. So if you are interested in attending the episode with Meryl, please go ahead and click on that, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Right on. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Brian, again, and thanks to all our listeners. And one last thing, thank you to the team that supports us because
Great
that's
work.
really important, and you do a great job. And thank you to the listening audience. We really appreciate it. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Bye.